Howdy, all you delicious people! Howdy, everyone! Power Rangers! Beast Morphers! So, reasonably, I went to the consensus of reviewing this thing, and I only reviewed it at first just watching the pilot. Which I honestly think is a quasi bad move on my part. Because actually, when sitting down and finally going, okay, let's actually watch this, I actually think that there are some decent things about this show. I think I wrote it off too quickly when I was going into reviewing every single season of the Power Rangers, but not every single episode I could get into because I just didn't have the time. I think now I'm taking the time to really going through and like, here's my first impression on this, but I'll go into it later and go into it, and here's where I am now. So, Beast Morphers, 15 episodes in, actually is a decent show. Really, like, when looking at Power Rangers, it's kind of like you kind of get a lot of the same old stories, but really, when looking at it, like, I tend to just continuously like the villains of the show. I think the villain things are really the most interesting things about these shows. Plus, I also like the Mantis Ranger. I believe that his name is Nate. I believe in the show. Like I like his Ranger. I'm not quite sure about his role. Like it looks like him and Zoe were kicking something off, which, bravo, bravo for Nate. But otherwise, justifiably within this show, we kind of go through the same beats of stuff. We kind of have like two people which share the last name Burke. I think one is Ben, and I don't remember the girl's name, to be brutally honest. But Burks, these two, because these are the like bulk and skull of this season, which no offense to these people, like that's just what it comes off as, brutally honest, that you have to have two people that are just stumbling and fumbling upon things, and hopefully they don't get hurt. Going into this show, like I could really just like I can just like it. There's some kind of very corny, cheesy moments, but of course I'm not their target audience. So reasonably, like this show wasn't made for me. But ultimately, I went into it anyways because why not? So going into this, we have, of course, this season we have Zoe, Nate, uh, Ravi. I want to say Ravi, and Devin. So far, we also have Steele, who is of course put in this show as well as a seemingly brother to Nate's character, which I thought was kind of like it's goofy, but then again, it's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting to have a guy that is consistently like a ranger 24/7, kind of like when Tommy was in Dino Rangers and he was stuck morphed. Like it's kind of like that, that kind of those kind of beats and those kinds of moments. Going into this, yeah, like I still really hate the whole gimmick thing where you have to have them like grow giant muscles or run really fast, or they like it comes off too much like Beetleborgs to me, like way too much like Beetleborgs. With the difference being that the Beetleborgs, like they would only have these powers when they're not morphed, and they would be like telekinetically moving things or this and that. But mood point, it kind of feels too much like Beetleborgs. Funny enough, Beetleborgs was actually on the Forever Red episode. So I guess that's probably why they were just like, well, hey, Beetleborgs hasn't been out in a long time, so how about we just steal this idea of giving these like people like certain powers? And I think Andros had like telekinesis, so I guess they were just like, well, let's give them like very specific abilities instead of having to like really create like a million different weapons for them, or like this and that. Just kind of use these abilities to just kind of push a story. If anyways, funny enough, like it does kind of feel like some of the villains were kind of fun. The villain part kind of feels like a little bit unique, but ultimately, when looking at it, they kind of also have to do the trope of writing a villain into a story, which actually feels nice. Because very rare do you actually have a monster that is usually built into a story nowadays. Most of the time, it's just, hey, randomly throw this person in there and then make up a story later, or just kind of throw them in there just for him or her, whichever, to get killed off. Yeah, that is the thing that ultimately I like. That's the whole thing with me. You have to win me over with either one of two things: visuals or story. It has to be one of the two. If you can't give me the one of the two, then ultimately, then I'm just kind of like, God, this season sucked. It always comes down to visuals and writing, and ultimately, like a lot of the times, it's like, yeah, the visuals are still good, but God, was there like the worst episodes I've ever seen in my life? That happens, sadly enough, when a thing gets successful, especially once it like goes more than one season. They probably like skip out on a lot of things, like how can we just make this a little bit cheaper and this and that. Who knows? But anything, I just wanted to go through and just kind of talk about this season, talk about some certain episodes that I thought were interesting, and just kind of in a generic sense, not going into heavily detail. I think that Roxy and Blade, the cyber twins, I guess, the cyber villain twins, like that whole thing was kind of like, you know what, this kind of feels like Team Rocket from like Pokemon, but I don't know. I think I could like, I think I liked this adjustment to where ultimately it feels like it doesn't have to be a person that looks just like a monster. It could just be a normal human and they're a villain of the story. I thought that that was kind of nice. I thought I could just appreciate the way that they went about doing that. Where like it could feel cheap, but I don't really care. Like ultimately looking at it, it just feels a little bit different. That not every villain has to absolutely be a guy in full fledged bodied uh, suit and mask and this and that, and it could just be somebody that looks like you and me. Interestingly enough, so going into this season, we really do have an interesting barrage of kind of visuals being done. Because of course this has very much like a hacker-esh like vibe, like a computer-esh like season where they're trying seemingly to use more computer graphics. Like I think Evox is basically a computer graphically snake character, which I thought was like bravo to them for like trying to like do something different and then also like crank out the budget for special effects. Even though that might not exactly cost that much, because more than likely it might just be a snake on a projector. I don't know. But ultimately, bravo to them for trying something different. Not trying to like ridiculously reinvent any wheels, but at least they're taking a risk. They're trying something. They're giving us something different. I do like that this woo. I do like this that this season kind of goes into kind of like this hacker-esh like vibe, and I think it's like it's interesting to me. It's interesting, but then again, there's still those same beats. There's still those same tropes. There's still some gimmicks. Like there was one episode where I was just kind of like, it was like a kind of episode because I'm like, God, I've seen this already. Like I just watched like Dino Charge, and like basically there was an entire episode about this kind of gimmick. And I'm like, dude, are they just ripping off like other seasons? Are they just like looking at other seasons and just blatantly ripping them off? Are there some people that just have like the same kind of approach with going into, hey, yeah, like I wrote this season 8 seasons ago, or I wrote this episode 8 seasons ago, and now I'm just going to recycle it here, um, and this and that. Who knows? But I don't know. I just like I could invest quasi in the characters, even though really it's like it doesn't really feel within 15 episodes like you really saw them really do anything that could just make you go, ugh. Like, if anything, I think really the only character that I can invest in is probably Nate. And that was probably about it. And that's probably the weirdest character to probably invest in. But I guess, like, I was interested in seeing what was going to go on with him and Zoe, because it was kind of like they were in hot water, let's just say. But anyways, now let's go into spoilers about these episodes. Ultimately, if you know what I'm talking about at the end of the day, let's go out of our way to just go into this. So, spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this show. So, the first 15 episodes, I'm not going to do these in exact order. More than likely, I'll just kind of pick through a couple episodes here and there and just spend an X amount of time talking about them. That's all I'm going to do, because there's some that kind of just feel irrelevant. When going into this, I liked, like, the pilot episode. I liked that we had like a government official that comes in and is warning them to not turn on the power grid, the Morphin grid. God, I always get that wrong every single time. The Morphin grid, because I want to say power grid because ultimately I'm just like that kind of person. Because ultimately when I think of Power Rangers, I think power grid. But ultimately it's Morphin grid, I believe. And ultimately someone can finally correct me, because I know I'll get that confused every single time. So, Morphin grid. So we have it to where this government official is coming in, who is, of course, I believe, the father of one of the Power Rangers. I believe it's Devin. Yeah, I think it's Devin. Yeah, there we go. Devin, because it would make sense for reasons that I won't explain. So, Devin ultimately sneaks into the place where they're doing the Morphin grid, and then ultimately, guess what happens? Like any toxic waste like accident. But it's kind of funny that Devin's father, the government official, is just kind of going in and mentioning, throwing out all these names to just kind of tweak our fancy to go, he's mentioning it, he's referencing it, he's talking about these things. Because ultimately he references Rita Repulsa, and we're like, he references Sledge, and we're like, and so on and so forth. Like all the villains mentioning that, like, how about we never open back up this Morphin grid, because every time we do, there is going to be a threat out there that is going to destroy this city, this place, our planet. And, like, that is such a smart maneuver to, like, justify otherwise just keeping the Morphin grid locked. Because it's like, dude, like, basically, it's Avengers all over again, where ultimately, like, it's higher form of war. And so, recently when going into this, I'm like, you know what? This is so, like, intriguing to me, like, in the very beginning of this. But then the thing that comes after that is just kind of like, you get hit with a bat of toxic waste. You got a guy who accidentally stumbles upon into the Morphin grid experiments, and then ultimately, well, bam, you get him and quite a few other people who are rightfully heirs to be Power Rangers ultimately end up being morphed, and then eventually have their abilities to be showcased within goofy parameters and this and that. So now we go into other episodes. So I think probably the worst episode out of these 15 is probably the Ravi tooth episode. I thought that was so like the consistent like guy who has the toothache, because I've kind of seen like Dino Charge where they have like the villain Cavity, and like the Cavity leaves people with toothaches and then they can't talk and they're like, ah, like kind of the same episode here, but like this guy is just coincidentally a person that like is going to take care of his teeth and avoid the dentist, but then eventually he's forced to go into the dentist because his tooth hurts. And so ultimately, once he gets there, like he has this most horrific looking visual of this guy like behind a door that you can't really see everything, and he just has this giant drill going into what we were to believe a person's face. But instead, when the door opens, we see a guy just drilling on some like thing of wood or something. Like he's doing construction in this dentist place for some reason, which doesn't make sense. But anyways, I think that is probably like the worst episode out of all this, but everything else is just kind of interesting, and I like how it's just. I like how it, like. I don't like how it, like, is too goody good, like some of the episodes. Like, too goody good. It's like trying to go, ooh, yeah, I just, like, squeeze and hug and charm it, and, like, I don't like that, but reasonably, like there's stuff that I can get into and like and invest in. Like Nate ultimately getting his powers by being held hostage, and then ultimately him coming up with rigging the cyber villains experiment to force them to ultimately make him a Power Ranger, which of course was the Power Ranger Mantis. He's like, "Oh, hey, yeah, great. The DNA of of the Mantis worked on me. Great, thumbs up." And then ultimately, he then also spills his DNA onto a Power Ranger emptied armored thing called Steel, and so now we have like this brother relationship that is, because these two things share the same DNA. You would think that this Steel would have just been a clone of Nate. You would have thought that he would have just been like cloned Nate, but I guess it didn't work that way. I don't know. I didn't quite get that part, but it doesn't really matter because we have some portions of time where Steel is consistently trying to learn. Like I think it was funny the one episode where Steel just pops off his arm and gives it to the government, the government guy, the guy who's Burke, the guy who's Burke, who's related to Ben Burke and the two kind of Bulk and Skull brethren of this show, because ultimately, yeah, we have like a tie of a real government official that like ties into the military and this and that. Anyways, so we have it within this show that Steel ultimately is trying to go into this and kind of learning, like basically like he's not having to take like baby steps, but through every episode you have these like little tropes where ultimately like you have Steel like break a basketball, and because ultimately the basketball falls on his head, and of course his head is like has like all of these horns, so it's kind of like a joke about like, oh yeah, this guy is gonna try to do everything in life, and well, shit, he blows a hole in a basketball while they're trying to play, and ultimately he tries to tape it up, but he just ruins the basketball even more because he leaves the thing um, like repetitiously blowing up, and it just blows up all over the place. So, anyways, going into this, yeah, there was some interesting episodes where you had like, of course, you have to every single season have to do like the evil cloned thing, uh, which ultimately was that they cloned Nate, and then eventually Nate broke into their headquarters to like. There's a repetitious time where ultimately the villains are trying to make it so that they can't do some something within this episode. Like they can't morph, or they can't get their weapons, or they can't get their Zords out. I thought actually that was really amazing. I'm like, wow, here's like the first time that we ever see a monster that is honestly decommissioning the Power Rangers to do what they normally do. I'm like, wow, what an actual change for once to see something like that where you have a monster that has a specific mission to just derail the Power Rangers, and I thought that that was interesting and fun. But then again, right after that, of course, the monster gets pretty much killed and sorted up, and just yeah, as per usual, as per every episode, like you always have to come up with a way to say goodbye, monster of the week. But yeah, so going into this, we very much have some interesting characters, and like I don't know, I think my favorite is probably gonna have to forcibly like hands down be Nate. Even though like there's some stuff about his character that I'm just kind of because like Nate is kind of like the goody good, and ultimately when he has consistent times with Steel where he's like grabbing him on the shoulder and like telling him everything's gonna be all right, I'm like, I'm like, I don't like those moments. I would love for Nate to just grab this guy and then just be mean to him for once. Like really mean. Like absurdly mean. And then Steel would just be like, "Oh, I'm sad. I'm sad." But interesting enough, when they had that basketball episode, like it was kind of interesting to like see Steel like open up a little bit and ultimately talk to Nate and tell him it's like, yeah, I'm sorry that you couldn't play basketball earlier because you just can't. Like maybe like because I just thought you could. So like ultimately it's like we're gonna figure out a way for you and me to like team up together and play basketball. Like and funny enough we have to where like Steel throws Nate into the basket, and like Nate slides all the way through the basket, and like we have this goofy way of like Nate and Steele just saying like, yeah, we got 2 points, we got 2 points, and then ultimately like Zoe and Devin are just, or Zoe and Robbie and Devin are just like, yeah, they must not realize that they're down by 20 points. It's like, yeah, but give them the win. So ultimately we have the Rangers, the Beast Morphers, having some beast-esh like sidekicks. Like to me, this kind of resembles like Digimons or like Pokemons that ultimately could talk to people. Because when looking at this, I'm like, okay, like these things are kind of like to be interesting things brought in because either like we got to do something that seems different enough. So like these little like I like how like they're taking a risk yet again to throw in these like little robots or these people with these like goofy looking costumes, And like I think that it's just a good enough risk. And so reasonably I just insist that like it's just interesting enough that these 15 episodes are kind of just like better than I thought they were, because I was thinking that this is going to be garbage or crap. But ultimately I just like I went into it, I'm like, you know what, let's finally watch this. I was like, you know what, like not too bad. Like I think the Nate and the Zoe like dating episode where you ultimately have a third party person that is jockeying to get to be Nate's assistant, like that was kind of an interesting episode to go into and just have something different presented, where I thought, like, here's an interesting thing with Power Rangers Beast Morphers. So in Beast Morphers, we have it to where there is a rule that a ranger should never date another ranger. Like, what is that? Like some kind of goofy thing going on there where like maybe because of the Dear John letter that Tommy had gotten in seasons past, or or any number of people that tried to date, like maybe Andros and Ashley, I think, or maybe any number of other kind of Rangers that happened through any number of seasons, which I'm forgetting at this time. Maybe Chase and Shelby from Dino Charge, maybe? I don't know. But yeah, when looking at this, I'm like, okay, like, if anything, like, these people hang around together, like, all of the time, wouldn't it just be convenient or easy just to date the person anyways? Because really, like, besides, like, school, homework, and then saving the world, when else are you gonna have, like, a convenient time to just, like, grab a slice of pizza or something with a girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever in the end. So yeah, going into this, interesting aspect of approaching this, but I think that's like realistically kind of like the tail end of it all, because that was like the last episode. Like it was kind of interesting to see this assistant just kind of blackmail her way to ultimately get into being Nate's assistant, and then eventually she kind of does bubkiss because reasonably she's like, well, I blackmailed myself into this job, and so I'm going to be able to keep it. And then when it goes awry, she ultimately blabs to everyone about this relationship to cause hot water within these people, but you know nothing's really going to happen, because why would there be? They're the Power Rangers. What are they going to do? Fire them? I doubt it. They'll probably have to amend this rule because it's a stupid rule, anyways. But yeah, that's like I know that that story is kind of silly, and why should I care about it? But I don't know. It's just it feels something different. There's a lot of episodes that really don't go into the whole dating dynamic. There's a lot of times where people don't attempt to like, because every character is really bland. A lot of the times, like they don't progress the characters. They just a lot of times just give them goofy episodes that bizarrely end up just kind of going into it and just like going like for realsies. I don't know what I'm saying now. I don't know what I'm saying. Taylor back to 5 to 10 to 20, maybe 30 minutes ago. I don't know. But, anyways, so I enjoyed these episodes. I probably didn't go into thorough detail about all of them. But, like, funny enough, there was an episode about a tuba. And I'm like, yeah, I was kind of stuck when because I went into band when I was in high school, and I ultimately was kind of stuck with an instrument called a baritone, which is like it's not like quite a trumpet, but it's also not quite a tuba. So it's kind of like in that middle ground of just like it looking like a tuba, but it's not a tuba. It's not an Arnold Schwarzenegger kindergarten cop tuba. It's not. It's just a smaller variation of a tuba. And as I said, tuba plenty of time. Anyways, there's an entire episode wrapped around a tuba or instruments that either have things being dropped into them like pop or liquid, or things shot out of them like whipped cream or something. And we also had this like little kid that is just kind of like desperate to fit in, but fit in wielding a tuba on as an instrument. And I'm like, okay, this is like the bizarrish like episode. This is like they had an idea for a monster and then they had to write something in to where it's like, well, hey, how about we just have it to where there's a kid just walking around in the middle of the park somewhere holding a tuba, just playing it out, just blah, blah, blah. And then Robbie comes in and he's like, hey, kid, like, my father was a jazz musician and he played the tuba. And so now you, kid, should feel great about, like, holding the tuba. And then, funny enough, we have it to where this kid ends up saving the world with his tuba. And I'm like, what is this? What is this? What? Huh? A kid saves the world with a tuba. Because that's the funny thing. So we have the tuba monster coming in, and he's blaring away. And we have it to where the kid comes in, and he's also blaring away on his tuba. And there's a battle of two tubas fighting it out. And funny enough, the kid ends up winning because he can just keep blaring on his tuba and blasting out the villain. And the villain ends up like breaking part of his instrument that is like an amplifier. And I'm just like, what a goofy episode. That is the goofiest episode. Like, it was like the goofiest episode that I think I've ever seen, because so many random things were desperately like smacked together for this thing to work. And I think that is probably where I'm going to end on this review, is just that episode was the goofiest thing. Like, so many desperations and random like tosses together of a kid in a tuba saving a day. Sounds like a weird the weirdest thing that I've ever heard in my life. The weirdest thing of my life, of a man having a tuba, just and just taking down supervillains with a tuba. A tuba! Oh my god, I think I'm gonna get out of here at the end of the day. I hope you appreciated this review, or you went through any number of these episodes or shows and huzzah the savior of tuba. 'Cause what a goofy episode. It's the goofiest thing that I've ever seen in my life. Like, the random just slapping together of just like, hey, we have this idea for a marching band instrument tuba, and they're like, well, we gotta have a kid be in this episode, so let's have a kid randomly walk in a park just hilarious. I had a good time. It was a good episode because it was awful, but it was great because it's just a tuba that saves the world. Yeah, thumbs up to all those people that ever played in band or forcibly played some instrument because probably some other person that was relative to you ultimately was telling you, hey, how about you play in band? And then you're like, yeah, I guess. Like, I guess I'll give it a shot. And then you try to do your best, and it's what it is. Anyways, I'm gonna get out of here. The tuba. It's not a tuba. It's a tuba. Anyways, I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.